Hi, everyone. You ever have that problem where you just can't sleep at night because you keep on wondering what's inside those NSX control plane tables? Well, rest easy. We're going to talk about that right now. We'll actually take a look at the tables and then we'll do a demo as well to see how stuff works live. So stay tuned. Let's take a look at populating the control plane tables. I've done this myself and a buddy of mine, Tim Burkhardt at VMware, at VMworld sessions. So let's look at how we populate these tables. And I will demo this when we get into the demo portion. That will be part 2 of the segments here, okay? So when we look at this picture here, first of all, you'll see I got a bunch of transport nodes. I got host 1, host 2, host 3. I even threw in a KVM host over here. Now, a little disclaimer, as of 4.x, KVM transport nodes are not supported anymore. So I'll be modifying this slide, but just for completeness, for anybody playing with anything pre-NSX4, this would be a valid drawing, okay? You'll see that, my host has these TEPs on them. There's the TEPs, just a single TEP each. I'm not showing management networks. You see I got my management cluster over here, my central control plane. So you'll see on host 1 and host 2 are on the left segment. And the left segment is 10.10.10.10.x. So this TEP IP of host 1 will be 10.10.10.11. This guy will be 10.10.10.10.12. You'll see the MAC addresses. This TEP's MAC address, I called it MAC VT1. This TEP MAC address, I called it MAC VT2. If any of you have taken VMworld sessions before, myself and Tim actually did some stuff on this. If I look at the right side, you'll see the same thing. So I got my subnet for my TEPs is 10.10.10.20, and this TEP IP will be 10.10.20.11, and this one will be 10.10.20.12. And you'll see the MAC addresses for each of the TEPs, MAC VT3, MAC VT4. That's the MAC addresses. When you look at the VMs now, you see all the VMs are powered off. Okay? You'll see VMA has an IP address of VMA-IP, and its MAC address is AAAA. You'll see VMB has a VMIP of VMB-IP and a MAC address of BBBB, and so on and so forth for D and E and F, and whatever. Okay. What else did I want to point out here? You'll see I got 2 segments. I got my green segment, which is VNI 5002, and I got a red segment, which is VNI 5001. Technically, I really don't care what the VNIs are as long as they're separate or different for each segment. Okay. Last thing I want to point out, you'll see the dotted lines here. This is just to illustrate what VMs or what host the VMs are running on. So these 2 VMs A and B, will run on host 1, VMD on host 2, VME over here, VMC over here, and VMF over here. Okay. And like I mentioned before, KVM is no longer supported in 4.0, so this I could just say ESX04 if I wanted to. All right, just for those of you out there that are familiar with this. So all the VMs are powered off. Let's look at the tables. Now, there's a couple of ways you can examine the tables. You could actually download them down a spreadsheet. I'll show you this. You can do it from a command line. That's what I actually do quite familiar with. So here they're showing me the command I can run on my NSX manager. So I go into the command line and I can type in get logical switch 5001. So I got to know the VNI. Oops, right here. And then I just want to look at the VTEP tables. If I want to look at the MAC table, I type get logical switch 5001 MAC table, and then last but not least, if you want to look at the ARP table, get logical switch 5001 space ARP table. So again, there's the commands you can run. So right now, let me back up. All these VMs are turned off. So the tables are empty. What do we see inside the tables? Now, there's a bunch of other stuff that you'll see here. I'm condensing this for the more important information. So you'll see each table, whether it's a VTEP table or a MAC table or ARP table, each will have the VNI ID, and then you'll actually see, the VNI ID inside each one of them. Okay. Now, before I begin powering on machines, each segment Each segment gets its own set of VTEP, MAC, and ARP tables. So you see the green segment here is 5002. It has its set of tables right here. The red segment, VNI 5001, has a set of tables right here. So if you got 1,000 segments, you got a VTEP, MAC, and ARP table for each one. All that's stored on your central control plane. So let's power on VMA. So we're going to power on VMA. What should we expect to see here? So let's go forward. So what happens is when you power on VMA, the local control plane on this transport node will do, in this case, it'll do a VTEP report. It will send a VTEP report to the management, to the central control plane. So it's going to send it out to whichever node's in charge of it, maybe node 1, 2, or 3, whatever. We'll show you that when we talk more about central control plane, whatnot, or troubleshooting. So it's going to basically send out a TEP report to the central control plane saying, hey, I got VM1 powering on right now on segment 5001, the red segment, right? You need to update your TEP table. So it's going to populate the TEP table. What do we see here? We have the VNI ID, great, 5001. We see the TEP IP. So this VM is utilizing this TEP, which is 10.10.10.11 right there. This is the subnet it's on. And then what's the MAC address of the VTEP? Well, this is MAC VT1. So this is what I would expect to see in the tables. The local control plane will also send another report. It's called the MAC report, basically telling the central control plane, update your MAC table. So it's going to say, hey, this is segment 5001. Here's the VM's MAC, AAAA, and here is the TEP IP that the VM's on. I call this the magic table, okay? I've heard this expression before. I call it the magic table. The reason why is because it says, hey, if you want to talk to VMA, there's the TEP it's on. So this is one of the tables I know how to figure out what TEP the VM is running on, okay? And last but not least, we do an ARP report, an IP report, which will populate the ARP table with 5001, the VNI, the IP address of the VM, and the MAC address of the VM. So this is what we should expect to see. If I don't see this, then I hit the brakes and figure out what's wrong, okay? Now, let's power on another one. So let's power on VMB over here. So we're going to power on VMB. And again, it's on the red segment. So again, what we're going to see now is we have the MAC table being updated with a second entry and the ARP table being updated with a second entry. Those are the entries for the VMB, right? You can check those out. Well, why didn't we put another entry in here? There's still only one entry in the TEP table. Why? It's because it's the same TEP. VMA and VMB are using that single TEP. Why put a duplicate entry? Now, if this transport node had multi-TEPs, and we talked about that in preparing the hosts, right? If it did have two TEPs, it's quite possible we may see a second entry here. Quite possible. It's not a guarantee, but in my example here, we probably would. Okay? Great. So this is what we should expect to see. Now, these two VMs are on the same transport node. Let's power on a VM somewhere else. So we power on this VM here, VME on host 3, transport node 3. So what we'll see now is when we power it on, it's a different transport node. It's never been registered. So you'll see that, boom, there's the entry for that TEP inside our TEP table, 10.10.20.11. So I know VME is on TEP 10. Sorry, I don't know that yet. So this is the TEP that it's on. There's the subnet, and there's the MAC address of the TEP. When I look at the MAC table, again, it shows me VME is on this TEP, 10.10.20.11, which is this one right here. And if I look at this table, 10.10.20.11, I know the MAC address. So by utilizing both tables, I can figure out where a VM is. And last but not least, again, we have the VM's IP and we have the VM's MAC address. So by utilizing these tables. Now, what happens here is the central control plane, since we now have two transport nodes populated here or participating, the central control plane is going to basically take these tables, all three of them, and it's going to send it down to transport node 1 and send it down to transport node 2. Sorry, 3 over here. Sorry about that. So when you look at, you can examine the tables on the host. If you look at the tables on the host, I'll show you troubleshooting in another video. I would be able to see, oh yeah, this is what the host sees. This is what the central control plane sees. Great, everything's working good. Or maybe, no, that's not what I'm seeing. Something's missing here. Then at that point, you got to figure out kind of what's going on, right? And I'll talk about troubleshooting in another video. So that's it. Now I just want to do one more here. It's a kind of a trick one that I always do to my students. So I'm going to power on VMF over here. So when I power on VMF, I wonder how many entries I'll see in this table, and in this table, and in this table. And the trick here is noticing where VMF is. It's on the green segment, a different VNI. So it would not go in those 5001 tables. It would be populated down here in this set of tables. Okay? So I always like to point that out. Okay, folks? One of the questions I usually get is what happens if the central control plane dies, right? If central control plane dies. These tables still exist inside your transport nodes, so communication still works. What's the part, where does it fall apart and you start having issues is if your central control plane died, you lost all 3 nodes, all right? You lost all 3. If all of a sudden I decide I'm going to power on VMD here, I'm going to power it on, right? If I decide to power that on, in an older version of NSX-T, I can't remember, it was like version 2 something, it wouldn't let you power it on. But if this was true here, again, central control plane's dead, and you decide for whatever reason I'm powering on this VM, you won't be able to talk to that VM. And the reason for that is this TEP does not exist in this table. There was, since control plane's down, we had no way of telling the control plane, nor all the other hosts, that VMD is being powered on and where it's located. So we don't know. Now let me give you another example. Let's say my control plane is dead. This is how we look, right? Control plane's dead. I now decide I'm going to power on another VM. Let's say I'm going to power on another VM on host 3 here. Host 2. Yeah, host 2. It's VMG, whatever. Right? So I power on the VM here. I wonder if it will work. Well, it would work. And the reason why we'd be able to talk to it, even though we can't update central control plane tables, host 1 is already aware of... oh, sorry. You know what? No, it wouldn't work. Never mind. Sorry about that. I made a mistake. Let's say I was powering it up on host 3. Sorry. Here's VMG. I'm going to power it on host 3. Would it work? Yes, it would, because host 3 already exists in the TEP tables. So host 1 knows about host 3. Remember we talked about replication, bum replication, just before this? It would say, oh, I need to send that broadcast out to host 3's TEP and have it sent up to VMG. So we would be able to talk to it, okay? So the moral of the story is, if your control plane is down, fix it, okay? Another thing it won't let you do, if control plane is down, for those of you that are familiar with vMotion, I want to migrate a VM running live while it's running to another host, it will not let you do a vMotion, okay? I haven't tried it in 4.1, but probably won't let you, okay? And that makes sense, because if I try to do a vMotion, well, when I vMotion my VM, we need a way of updating the table saying VM A is no longer on this transport node. It's now on whatever, this transport node. We got to put an entry in there for it. So again, when we vMotion VMs around in an NSX environment, we need to update the central control plane, and the central control plane needs to update all the other transport nodes saying, hey, we just vMotioned, this VM is now over here. That's not, and that's not a big deal, but again, so again, if control plane's down, you won't be able to do vMotions or anything, which to me is, I think is a good thing. NSX for vSphere, anybody played with that, it allowed you to do it, and it created all kinds of potential issues, which we won't get into. My SSH into my NSX manager. Close that screen, there we go. So first of all, I'm on my NSX manager, and there's various commands you can run. I'm just going to show you a few right now. So first of all, what I need to find out is what my segment's VNI numbers are, the virtual network identifier, right? So let me type in get logical switches. I can hit tab to autocomplete for me. I hit enter. And you now see, here's my 3 segments. You see app segment, web, and database. So over here, you see the UUID of the segment. I could use that. That's too long. All right. And then you see the VNI over here. That's kind of small for me to see. So you see the VNI 66561. Let me write that down. 66561. Okay. Now I want to examine the TEP tables, the TEP, MAC, and ARP tables of the web segment. And again, if you watched part 1, right, I showed you how those tables got populated, right? So let's type in get logical switch. What was it? 66561. Or I could type in the UUID. I don't think so. And then I'm going to look at the VTEP. I'm going to hit entry. Remember the 3 VMs? We're running on 3 different hosts. Boom. So I should expect to see 3 different TEPs here. Okay. So this kind of wrapped around on me, unfortunately. But you see there's the VNI ID. Sorry. The VNI ID. You'll see the IP address. This is the IP of the TEP. That's the TEP IP of host 2, TEP IP of host 3, and test IP of host 1. Okay? You'll see, actually, you know what? When I look at this, I just didn't recognize the numbers, but technically speaking, you could go and view that within vSphere, and I showed you that when we were preparing our transport nodes. You'll see there's a label over here. This doesn't really get used now. I know back in the older days that was basically, this label was a way the control plane identified the local control plane agent on the transport node. I don't really use it, to be honest with you. I look at this and go, yeah, whatever. You'll see the subnet of it. You see the MAC address. This is the TEP's MAC address. And then you see the transport node ID. You'll see the NCAP type, right? And it's wrapping around. The encapsulation type is over here, Geneve. And then it says then the transport binding says here it's invalid. Don't worry about that. Invalid there. I've seen that ever since, like, for many years now. I've been told, again, from engineering at VMware, that may be used for some kind of future feature or something. I have never seen anything there. So don't freak out if you see that. That's okay. All right. So we see we've got our 3 TEPs. Great. That makes sense. Let's look at the MAC table. Bam. 3 entries. What do we see? The VNI ID. We see the MAC address. Now, I call this the magic table. You'll see this is the MAC address of my VM. And you'll see this is the TEP that VM is on. So you can look at this and say, okay, if you're looking for this VM, it's on this TEP. You'll see I'm not doing any IP6 stuff. And you'll see the transport node ID. That's the UUID of the transport node. Again, I don't really use that often, but again, it's useful for other stuff. Great, there's the MAC table. Let's look at the ARP. 1, 2, 3, ARP. And we got 3 entries in there. So now in the ARP table, you see the VNI ID, you see the IP address of the VM, and you see the MAC address of the VM. So it's a typical ARP table. So there's the VM's IP, there's the VM's MAC, and you'll see the transport node it's on. Okay. Now, one of the questions I sometimes get is, Steve, do these tables get flushed out? The control plane, central control plane, doesn't flush these tables out. It's sort of a yes and no answer. Control plane doesn't do it. It's up to the transport node, because remember, control plane doesn't run in the data plane. It runs on the management network. The transport node sits in the data plane. So technically speaking, it's the transport node's job to say, hey, you know what? Go flush this table control plane, right? Or central control plane. That's its idea. Now, let me kind of tell you what I've seen in the past and what I've kind of noticed now, right? So in the past, I would look and say, when I got this question, I would say, no, the VTEP and MAC table would stay there. So if I leave this alone, come back in 2 months, and I don't do anything, my MAC entries in the MAC table and my VTEP entries would still be there, okay? It doesn't get flushed. Now, the ARP table did get flushed. Notice I said did, okay? The ARP table did get flushed, and it was sort of, okay? So if the VM had a static IP address, what would happen if nobody talked to that VM? So if the transport node says, "Hey, nobody's talked to this VM in 5 minutes," it would tell the central control plane remove the entry. So technically speaking, if your VMs had static addresses, this table would flush out for that entry in 5 minutes. That's what I've noticed. If it had a DHCP address, it would be flushed out based on the lease time. So let's say you had a lease of 3 days. If nobody talked to that that VM in 3 days, the transport node would say flush it from the tables. But typically with DHCP, usually after 50% of the lease, it goes and requests that address again. So technically speaking, what would happen in a day and a half, it would hit that DHCP server and request that address. So it just created some communication. So that timer would start all over again. So typically with DHCP, I would never see the addresses flush. With the static, I would see it flush at 5 minutes. Now, I'm just going to say something. Now, I can't remember what version this, I noticed this, and it might have been 3.2 or something. I can't remember. There's all the different releases and stuff. Maybe it was 3.1. I can't remember. I've noticed now that the ARP table doesn't get flushed at all, even with static addresses. Okay? And I would leave it for quite a while. Now, I haven't tested that in 4.x, to be honest with you. Okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. Let's do something else here. Let's do something a little interesting. Again, if you saw part 1, we talked about the tables. Let me minimize this. Let's. I don't need to be viewing this here. Let's close that down. And Web 1 is on host 1. Web 2 is on host 2. Web 3 is on host 3. Let's do something interesting here. Let's put Web 1. I'm going to drag and drop it on host Web 2. Sorry, I'm going to drag and drop it on host 1. This is called a vMotion for those of you that might not be familiar with it. I'm migrating a VM live while it's running. Let me do the same thing with Web 3. Let's put it on host 1. Let's go back. There we go. Web 3, we wait. Great. Well, that's done. Let's look at the tables now. Let's go back and look at the VTEP table. Come on, don't make a liar out of me. 1 entry. So let's look at the Mac table. Should still have 3 entries. But the table got updated. Notice all these VMs are running on the same TEP now because they're all running on that same host. Okay? And then if I look at the ARP table, I still have my 3 entries there. So we see that, and I mentioned this in part 1, when you do vMotion, the tables get updated. The local control plane on the host updates the table. Let me show you something else as well. Let me go back. Let's put these VMs back, okay, before I forget. So let's put Web 2 on host 2. It's really quick. Next. Web 3 on host 3. Come on. 3 on host 3. We go next, finish. Let's just wait and see. And it's done. Let's go back in and look at our tables. It should be back. Let's VTEP. We should have 3 VTEPs there. Drum roll. There we go. Boom. We got our 3 entries back for 3 VTEPs. And then again, if we look at the Mac tables, those will be updated again with the appropriate taps where the Macs are found. Okay. All right. You see the tap portion here has all been updated. And if we look at the ARP table, again, that should be up. Oh, notice that. Wait a second. Let's see this. That's interesting. Look at the ARP table. 11. I only see 11. That's actually rather interesting, right? So it looked like it got flushed out, those 2 hosts, right? Don't freak out if you see something like this. Like if I go in the ARP table and I don't see anything, maybe nobody's talking to that VM. Maybe it got flushed out. So I don't freak out here, right? Let's look at ARP. It got flushed. The ARP table did get flushed. Looks like it's 5 minutes. Okay, let's go in and I wasn't planning that, to be honest with you. Let's go into here. Let's go back into Web 1. Let's go to remote console. Let's ping Web 3. There we go. Web 2. There we go. I'll just do Web 3 again. There we go. Let's go back Come on. Let's go back to the ARP table and take a look. Come on, baby, don't make a lie. Bam, the entries are in there. That's exactly what I want to see. So don't freak out if you don't see anything in the ARP table. Test it. Oh yeah, it's working. Boom, then you should see entries. Okay? So that was kind of a neat thing to do. And last but not least, let me do this one other thing. How can I view these tables? There's other ways I could view these. Let me go back. I don't need this open. Let's go back to here. Let me go into NSX. If you don't like the command line, you can go to your segment. Here's the 3 vertical ellipses. Download the MAC table, download the VTEP table. You don't see anything with the ARP table. I'm not sure why, but anyways. So if I click on download the VTEP table, it's asking me, do you want to download it from the central control plane? Or do you want to download it from a transport node? And you can pick the transport node. This is useful if you're doing some troubleshooting. You go, the control plane looks like the control plane has the right information. What about the transport node? Does it have the proper information? Maybe it's missing entries or something, right? So it's a way for you to do that comparing. You can also do it from a command line at the host. Honestly, I don't really use that one that often, but I'll probably cover it in a troubleshooting video at one point, okay? So this is kind of neat. You can do this. You can download that. If I click on control plane, download, and you'll see it's a CSV file. Just download it, okay? Let's do another thing here, and that'll be it. Let's go back to vSphere. Don't do this in production. I'm going to turn off these VMs. I'm going to right-click. Now, normally you want to make sure you shut them down properly. I don't care about my demo. I'm going to power off just so it does it fast. Power off. Yes. Let's go into here, power. And I normally demo this stuff in my classes as well. If any of you have taken my classes. So there we go. I've shut down, I've turned off those 3 VMs or shut them down. Well, we know better. Let's go back and look at the TEP table for that segment. Boom, nothing's in it. So at the Mac, it's empty. And let's look at the ARP. Those tables got flushed because the host turned off the machines and it told the central control plane, these guys are no longer participating on the segment, get rid of them. Now, I don't see app and database VMs here, right? Because I'm not looking at the segment. Again, I'd have to, again, it's based, you get a set of tables for each segment. So I would have to look at the app segment individually and the database segment individually. You got to pick up their VNI. So we see that the tables got depopulated. Let's power them on again. So when I power on these VMs, what's happening? Underneath the covers, the transport nodes, the hosts, are basically doing a TAP, MAC, and IP report. Basically what is happening is the host, ESXi host, my transport nodes, are reaching out to the control plane, central control plane, saying, hey, you need to update, we just had a VM power on, you need to update the TEP table, the MAC table, and the ARP table, okay? And it's since all these VMs are on different hosts, the central control plane is also making sure that each of these hosts, ESXi 1, 2, and 3, all got a copy of these tables, all right? Let's go back and look. Let's look at the TEP table. Come on, don't make a liar. Bam, I got my 3 entries. Let's look at the MAC table. Come on. I got my 3 entries. And last but not least, the ARP table. I'm not going to freak out if I don't see anything, but I do have something. Okay? So that's it on the creating a segment. Pretty easy to create a segment. We tested connectivity. Connectivity between segments don't work because we haven't gotten gateways. That's the next video. And then we examine the tables that I talked about. If you folks enjoyed this, hit that like button. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, please subscribe to the channel. It only takes a click. It's free for you. It helps me out greatly, okay? Because this is how monetization works with YouTube based on subscribers and stuff like that and the amount of views. So thanks again for watching. Please hit subscribe to the channel if you found this useful, and have a great day. Bye now.